And good evening and welcome to the Kaufman Corner Trade Deadline Edition. We're not going to call it an emergency podcast. We knew the trade deadline was tonight, so we're not shocked or stunned by what was going on. But it is finally our chance to unravel and break down what it is the Kansas City Royals did. With us, as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, co-author of Rob and Rany on the Royals, Rany on the Royals, seen his work in the Athletic, in Grantland, and of course, one of the co-founders of Baseball Prospectus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. You can catch my work at 810WHB.com. And Rany, here we sit. A lot of conversation the other night about what they would get done. The Andrew Benintendi deal has been done. We're not going to spend any time, or maybe not a lot. Maybe there'll be a reference to it for some, as it pertains to something that got done here. But a lot of optimism, some hope, some pessimism about what we thought the Royals would ultimately get done. I'm going to say you pretty much nailed it. I thought Scott Barlow would get moved. I thought they would make that decision. They didn't. I think you said you thought Whit Merrifield would go. We were in agreement on that. That did happen. Michael A. Taylor, we thought was an intriguing one. We're going to get to the guys, not only who they traded, but the guys they didn't trade and what that means. But let's start up at the top with Whit Merrifield, a guy who's been, I don't want to say a lightning rod, but a topic of why they didn't bring him up sooner. He played so well early on, a fan favorite, and then, kind of skills deteriorating. A guy at the center of a hurricane when it comes to the 10 players that didn't play in Toronto, and the Royals decide to move on. Was this just, we need a fresh start, you need a fresh start, we'll take what we can get, or do you like what they got in this deal?
So first, let's pause to just acknowledge how objectively hilarious it is that Whit Merrifield got traded to Toronto. That's Whit Merrifield.
Did you like how I put it up there? Whit Merrifield's a Blue Jay. Seriously, that's how I set it out there.
I did not see that twist coming, and in a way though that I think really sums up. I don't want to minimize the word tragedy, but in a way, the tragedy of how Whit Merrifield's career ended in Kansas City, with a guy who really did an awful lot to ruin his reputation, a hard-earned reputation for being, the best player on the Kansas City Royals in the post World Series era. Really, I mean, him and Salvador Perez had missed an entire season in that span, and obviously he's well known for what he did before 2016. And Whit Merrifield kind of threw that legacy out the window, and it's being traded to Toronto just points out how absurdly unnecessary it was for him to do that, because he has to be getting a vaccine shot as part of this trade. And, as we had discussed before, you only have to get one shot. The Johnson & Johnson one-shot regimen qualifies, and that will almost certainly be what he does, because it'll speed up the time the time it takes for him to be able to cross the border, because he cannot go into Canada for 14 days. It just so happens that the Blue Jays are on the road for the next 10 days, which it turns out to be quite fortuitous. I wonder if they'd make this trade otherwise. So he may play for them for the next 10 days and then sit out a couple of days before he can head to Toronto. But ultimately, he did something for the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that he has played for exactly 0 times, that he would not do for an organization that he had been with since he was drafted, and I want to say 2010. That's sad, and that is leaving the bad taste in the mouths of a lot of Royals fans and probably a lot of people in the Royals organization. And ultimately, he has no one to blame for that but himself. So it is sad. I think it's. I saw some people on Twitter complaining that Whit Merrifield's reward for not being willing to get vaccinated is that he gets traded to a contender. But my point is, he got traded to Toronto. That if JJ and Dayton Moore didn't have at least a little chuckle about that, then they're not nearly as fun guys as I thought they would be. So I think that is not a punishment necessarily, but certainly I don't think he got rewarded. He got his hypocrisy got exposed for what it was.
And by the way, I reached out when I started hearing that this trade was coming down. I said, hey, this deal happened, got confirmation. I said, the vaccination thing, no comment. Like which to me is which is smart on their part, right? Because the moment they do, and listen, I'm the type of guy that I would say, "Are you sure you want to go with that? Is that what you want to say?" There's no comment coming from the Royals, and I think it's smart because as soon as you do, you got a 24-hour news cycle about the Royals say this. Right. Trade happened. We got nothing to say. And I think that is a smart play, and I'm sure they'll have a press conference tomorrow and kind of recap everything. And JJ Picola, since he did the last one, I assume we'll do this one, and he'll say something to the effect of, "We love Whit, great guy, had an opportunity, like what we got. We're better off." I expect him to say all the right things. But I think there is something to what Cameron's saying here. What does it say about the Royals that Benintendi and Merrifield were willing to get the shot to leave town, but not willing while we were here? And, the Royals will dance around that and say, well, it was to be on a contender, and if we were contending, we think they get the shot. They weren't willing to do it for you.
And they weren't willing to do it before the season, before you knew that the Royals wouldn't be a contender, because everyone thought that the Royals would at least be, in the fringe of the race.
When the sales pitch was, we're going to contend, they weren't willing. They were willing to sacrifice 4 games in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And, I think that can't be. Listen, I don't care about the politics of it. I don't even care about I do care about it as a human being, the vaccination part of it and the health part of it. But it is where it is. It is part of the equation. It can't be poo-pooed away. And that, I think this shows the Royals, they didn't blow up all 10, right? Brady Singer is still there. There's still a lot of guys that are there. But a couple of the older guys that they could move, they did move. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Now, the question is, and I think it's to change the chemistry of the clubhouse. I don't know that they changed enough of it for my liking, because if you thought you had a contending team and they disappointed, you got to check one of 2 things. Did we make a mistake? Is that on us? Did we over-evaluate our guys? Probably. I think there's some of that. But also there's some of it that's like, no, we should be better. And we're not. And that's on the players or the manager and coaching staff. You can find wherever you want to find that. We know we've been round and round about the coaching staff, right? We know about the development side of the pitching. Those are all other discussions. But I think some of this has to fall on the players, that the players have underachieved. And I don't know how you can go into the offseason or spring training and say, we're going to go back at it with the next guys. We just had some rough luck. Screw that. I want some butts, right? Top Gun said it. You buzz the tower, you spill my coffee. I want some butts, right? You remember that scene where he goes around? He doesn't even say specifically what it is he wants. He just wants some butts. And I think that's sometimes where you're an organization. Listen, I'm not sure who, but somebody's paying the price, because you're not all going to go into the offseason and go on vacations with each other and play canasta with you and the wives and go on boat trips and send funny videos out and then come back to spring training. And here we all are again. Somebody needs to be made uncomfortable, and it needs to be known that there are ramifications when you crap in your hat. So I'm happy that at least a couple of guys that were part of a mix who didn't seem to think it was important for this club to do everything they could, but we'll do it for another club. Those guys needed to be moved. There needed to be a shakeup, and we at least got that.
We did. And look, what we want ultimately is accountability, right? We want there to be consequences for actions and consequences for performance. And poor performance requires, if it has to be a sacrificial lamb, it has to be a sacrificial lamb. And I do think that was part of what happened here. I mean, if one person was going to be traded today, it had to be Whit Merrifield. So I'm glad, from that perspective, I'm glad that the Royals moved on. And I think they may have sent a slight message in the fact that they did trade Cam Gallagher, who was not somebody who was on the radar for most people. I thought there was a slight possibility he might move, but he was certainly not the key guy to move. But he was also one of those guys who did not go to Toronto. And between him, Merrifield, and Benintendi, you went from 10 players, you're now down to 7. 7 is still too many, and specifically, it's too many. It still triggers the more restrictive rules involving clubhouse behavior and going out to eat, as a team. That I believe it requires an 85% vaccination rate for those regulations to be lifted, and I think the Royals are still under that. And that's why you could say maybe they should have moved some more guys. I don't know if they could have ever gotten there, because some of the guys who are not vaccinated that we know, MJ Melendez, Brady Singer, Dylan Coleman, those are very core guys that were not being moved regardless. But Michael A. Taylor, that you really want to send a message, there's another guy you could have moved. To me, the trade deadline, my overall evaluation of it is similar to my evaluation of the draft in a way, which is it was underwhelming, maybe even a little disappointing, but that the Royals did just enough that I'm not, I'm not upset. And even 10 minutes before the deadline, I was expecting to be giving an epic rant about their complete unwillingness to do things, but they did just enough they did the bare minimum. I'd like to see the Royals do more than the bare minimum. I'm not angry, but I'm a little bit disappointed. But we could talk about the return they actually got in some of these trades.
Right. Let's do that. First, let's take a moment. And I just saw this come across, and a number of people are mentioning it in the comments.
Yes,
that
I see it.
Confirmed that at 94 years old, Vin Scully has passed. Certainly the greatest baseball announcer in the history of the game, maybe the greatest announcer in the history of sports. Nobody more iconic than Vin Scully. Nobody more articulate to the very last day that he broadcast, all the way up to 2016, 1949 to 2016. He broadcast games, was unbelievable. I think his ability empowered whose ability to try to do what he did, and oftentimes made for less than broadcasts, but an incredible announcer by all accounts, a great human being. And he'll certainly be missed by the Dodgers. He'll be missed by everybody who is a baseball fan and anybody who appreciates announcing of any kind. So we give our thoughts and pass along our condolences.
Yeah, that's some pretty harsh news to get in the middle of this podcast. Just an absolute legend, and I mean, I'm sure as you being somebody who this is your vocation. I mean, he's a legend. He's on the Mount Rushmore of announcers, and I would argue that he might be the greatest. Let's say he's the greatest team-based announcer, maybe of all time on any sport. I'm trying, anybody to be associated with one team through, we're talking about going back to Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Dodgers for as long as he was. And the thing that struck me about Vin Scully was till basically the end, when he was 87, 88 years old in broadcasting, he was alone in the booth. Mm-hmm. That still, I would tune in to his last season. I would tune into Dodgers games just to hear his voice, just to marvel at the fact that we should all be so blessed to be that lucid, that articulate, that just omnipresent, to be able to do a national broadcast on our own in our mid to late 80s, and he still was doing it as well as anybody in the sport. He was phenomenal, and the sport is poorer for his loss.
Two notes. I'll quote two of my friends who have texted me. One, Kurt Nelson, who is the proprietor of the Royals Hall of Fame, who simply said, "R.I.P. Vin Scully, the best ever." I think that is great. And then it was mentioned Curtis Siebold does a great Vin Scully impression. Curtis Siebold, who works with me on my radio show on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Curtis texted, "No one has ever been as good at anything as Vin Scully was at calling baseball." And I think that's pretty well said.
That's basically it. Yeah. I mean, he was the stand. He was, and probably forever will be, the standard for which a play-by-play baseball broadcaster will be measured. So
at 94 years old, though, a life well lived, a full life, and one to be celebrated, no doubt. And we'll keep family, friends, our condolences to them, keep them all in our thoughts as we wish them the best. And we'll say this: 94 years and an incredible life. So he got all of it. So congratulations to Vin. If we celebrate the life of Vin Scully, it was a great one. And certainly we were all better off as baseball fans for having been a part of his life, getting a chance for him to share his insights into the game. So we certainly remember Vin Scully here. Not to turn to the trivial side from life and death. Death is part of life. But to baseball, and let's go through the deals, Rany, and get your thoughts on what the Royals did get. Whit Merrifield in return. Like I said, this is one that I think you could have made a case for releasing Whit Merrifield. I think there was probably talk about this within the Royals organization with his comments that were there. Instead, they get return on him. I talked to some people about like, hey, I've long said Whit should have been dealt back when the rebuild started. I've had people tell me, yeah, well, what do you think they were going to get, right? Like, he doesn't hit the ball the wall. He doesn't get swing and misses. He's not frontline starting pitcher. Like, what do you think Whit Merrifield to bring in a trade? And I think that's a little bit revisionist, like, because
I think that's very revisionist. He was a valuable player. I mean,
yes.
Everything you just said, you could say that about Ben Zobrist when the Royals traded for him. Like, he's not a power hitter, but if you do everything well and you can play multiple positions,
so Zobrist had more. Zobrist had more and more.
But Merrifield had more speed. But Merrifield had more speed and probably better average ability. I mean, Zobrist was the better player, but like for 2 months of Ben Zobrist, the Royals were willing to give up a top prospect, and justifiably so. Merrifield, as recently as a year ago, but certainly 3 years ago, they could have gotten a king's ransom for him. And I think it is a reflection of how much his value has declined, both because his performance has declined and because less club control means you're getting less time with that player. But it's a testament to how much his value has declined that the 2 players they got is actually, I'm completely fine with the return. I'm actually quite impressed that they actually got in Max Castillo, especially I think a major league ready, literally major league ready reliever. He was in the major leagues and in 21 innings in his rookie season so far this year, 5 walks, 20 strikeouts, a 3.05 ERA. This is a guy who I think will help the Royals pitching staff, assuming they don't ruin him the way they've ruined some other guys. Whether that's going to be as a reliever or as a starter, I don't know. Even if he's a bullpen guy, 6 years, 6 more years of a decent reliever is probably worth 1.5 years of Whit Merrifield. And if he does have at least starter potential, he's been mostly a starter in the minor leagues. So I've seen him described as probably a future swingman, the guy who can go back and forth. I think the Royals will be best off trying to figure out what role he's best in and keeping him in that role. But I think Max Castillo alone is a nice get. I think I saw him, I think Baseball America had him rated as the number 14 prospect in the Blue Jays system, which I mean is as high as any prospect the Royals got in the Benintendi trade. So he's a quality prospect. Summer Taylor is much more of a hit or miss guy. He's a guy he's a hitter. He's a 20. I think he just turned 24 years old, and this year was hitting 258, 337, 426 in AAA. So low average, but plus speed. I've heard him describe that. He's got some pop. 9 home runs in 70 games this year. 16 home runs in 87 games last year. His strikeout rate, he has cut his strikeout rate about 30% from last year to this year. Last year's strikeout rate was 29%. This year it's like 21%. And he is a second base / outfielder. There's a lot here that looks like a Whit Merrifield starter kit. When you look at the skill sets, a lot of speed, sneaky power, ability to play second base and the outfield. And if you look at Whit Merrifield at the age of 24, in I think 2013, he was actually probably not even as good a hitter as Summer Taylor is this year. Now, Whit Merrifield's development was extremely unusual from that point. So I still think it's very unlikely that Summer Taylor turns into an everyday guy in the majors at all, let alone a Whit Merrifield. He's, again, hit or miss. I think there's a good chance he'll be a nobody, in which case it's still a decent deal. But the Royals apparently really like this guy. They were looking at him in the Rule 5 draft last year, if there had been a Rule 5 draft. And I'm always in favor of picking up new hitters and seeing what Drew Saylor and the Royals minor league hitting development can do with them, and hope that you get lucky with one of these guys. So for 18 months, not even 18 months, 14 months of Whit Merrifield, I think it's a pretty good return.
Strikeout percentage. The on base is there. One thing I will give credit to what they've been doing of late, the on base percentages have looked better of late, of the guys they're going in to bring in. And we feel confident, as we've talked many times on this podcast, that they know how to develop the hitters. So I think you can feel good. So I'll take anyone that they bring in as a hitter and say, okay, you're going to get the most of them, right? The question is, to go back to what you're talking about, was with Castillo. And I will say this, he doesn't look like your typical 6'2", 280, is not your typical Royal, prototype,
right,
cookie cutter guy. Like this is a broadening of the, of the mind of what a guy should be. Not that they haven't had some guys that were calorically challenged. Not that I'm one to throw, shots at it, obviously myself. But, I'm at least encouraged by that. And is this just numbers, Right. I'm reading the book MVP Machine or MVP Maker. I can't remember. It's around here
Yeah,
somewhere.
Ben Lindbergh's big. Yeah.
Yeah. And he talked about how, part of what Branch Rickey did was just throwing numbers at it. Like if you get a million teams, you got a million players, somebody on there ought to be good, right? Is that part of what they've done here at the very end is let's throw as many guys with some live arms at the equation and at least 3 or 4 of them got to be there. I mean, would you call this a desperate attempt at saving one's job? Because I think there could be people, that's always the question that people have. Are they just grabbing lesser talents that they can plug into the big leagues and say, see, we got something for this guy very quickly, or are they maximizing their returns on the long end? How would you describe the trade from that standpoint?
I think the Merrifield trade, I actually think they maximized the return because I don't think you were going to get a really high upside guy in the minor leagues for Whit Merrifield. Not now. Even a year ago, yeah, maybe. I mean, the mistake the Royals made was a mistake they made in previous trading deadlines. They didn't make a mistake with Whit Merrifield on August 2nd, 2022. I think this is about the return they could have hoped for. In terms of throwing bodies at the problem and just trying to load up, the problem with the Branch Rickey strategy in modern baseball is simply the realities of the 40-man roster. If you have too many guys who are hitting Rule 5 eligibility too quickly, then you just run the risk of bleeding talent. I think one of the interesting things, and I think deliberate things the Royals did with the Benintendi trade, if you look at the guys that got Sakema, Beckway, and Chandler Champlin, those guys, Sakema was taken in the 2019 draft. He'll be Rule 5 eligible this year. But Beckway was taken in the 2020 draft. He won't be eligible until next year. And then Champlain was not taken until the 2021 draft and won't be eligible for 2 years. So spacing those guys out so you have time to evaluate each player. And you don't want to have a wave of 10 or 12 prospects that you suddenly have to add to a 40-man roster in one offseason. That's when you run into problems. And so I think roster management is a big part of this. Now, Castillo takes Merrifield's job on the 40-man roster, so there's no issues there. Summit Taylor is Rule 5 eligible and is not on the 40-man roster, but he's a lesser prospect. They're going to have some time to evaluate him. I've also heard that he has some injuries, and in fact, there's some talk that he may not even play the rest of the season, but that they knew that going in. And that may be a buy low candidate. Here's a guy who's not healthy, but you can kind of stash him away between now and spring training. Let Drew Saylor sink his claws into him and rework that swing and tweak that swing if you need to, and see what you have next year. I'm completely fine with that. I think Castillo is the present day value, and Taylor is sort of the high risk, slightly high upside second player in a deal. For Whit Merrifield in 2022, that's the best you were going to get.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, thank you, Don. He said Soren was right about moving players a few years ago, except I would have kept Salvi. That would be the right thing, but we've now seen Danny. I mean, there were 3 guys that were really of note: Whit Merrifield, Danny Duffy, and Salvador Perez that could have been dealt that weren't. The Royals didn't get anything for Danny Duffy. They do get something for Whit Merrifield, so let's be clear about that, and we'll track this and see how it goes. And Salvador Perez continues to hit. So I think that's something of note. And one other thing I'd like to address while we've got the time, Soren, I got to say, Tony says, automatic deduction for wearing the Colorado Rockies shirt on a Royals podcast. Let's be clear, not a Rockies shirt, just Colorado. Just went up there. It's the state, not Rockies. Are we anti the entire state of Colorado?
I thought you were just throwing shade at the one team to clearly have a worse trading deadline than the Royals, because the Rockies, like they seem to do every year, did nothing. They just, everything we talk about with the Royals and how frustrating some of their decision-making process is, the Rockies are they're at a completely higher level of just self-denial. They act like they are contenders when they are not. So as frustrating as it is to be a Royals fan, just be thankful we don't root for the Rockies front office, because that is a problematic organization. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm with you. I think they could have cut Whit Merrifield and to get something for him and get a live arm and get a guy who's been getting on base, and he fits the athlete thing that they like, which throw a lot of athletes at it. Eventually, one of them hits. I got no problem with the deal for Whit Merrifield. Emmanuel Rivera to the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Not a trade we were expecting to see.
Yeah, this is kind of them going. I don't think anybody was expecting this. They're moving a guy that they have team control on for a long time for a guy that has less team control. This isn't what most people thought they would be doing. this is, would we say it's at least a riskier move?
Yeah, I mean, the Royals basically were buyers at the deadline. It's a bold move, Cotton. Not what I was expecting. But having said that, like if you took this trade out of the context of it being right before the deadline, if they'd made this trade, I don't know, on June 29th instead of August 1st, I think I might like it. Emmanuel Rivera, all credit to him. He sort of very quietly worked his way. He was a 19th round pick out of Puerto Rico, and I'm not even sure if he was high school or college. I think he was like, it was almost like a post secondary year where he was the equivalent of like a junior college guy, and was never an elite prospect in the minors, but just kind of patiently worked his way up, forced his way into the major leagues last year, and did not embarrass himself at third base, both offensively or defensively. He was, I would describe him as a replacement level player. And in fact, the numbers suggest he's better than that, 0.9 WAR in about 92 games. So a better than replacement level player overall. And all credit to him to making himself into a major leaguer, and for the Royals to giving him that opportunity. And especially after Adalberto Mondesi got hurt, like, having him be able to take over at third base, which allowed them to move Bobby Witt over to shortstop. But having said that, if the Royals have made the internal evaluation that Emmanuel Rivera is not going to be an everyday player, does not have that kind of value, then it makes sense to get what you can for him. Because the thing about being a borderline third baseman is, if you are not quite good enough to start, I'm not sure what value you have on a major league roster. It's not like you're a shortstop where you can be a utility guy. It's not like you're a center fielder. You can have speed to be a pinch runner, do things off the bench. He doesn't make for a really good bench player. That skill set, maybe
Right.
I could see him being a platoon guy. I don't know what his platoon splits are exactly. If he can really hit lefties, maybe there's a role for him there. But it's just a tough profile to be that kind of player if you're not good enough to start in the majors. But at the same time, if there's a team out there that values him more, and the Diamondbacks clearly did, why not get something for him? And Luke Weaver, again, you're trading 6 years, I guess 5 more years of Emmanuel Rivera for a year and a half, of Luke Weaver. And really, had that half year, doesn't matter, right? You're getting Luke Weaver for 2023 and only 23. But having said that, Luke Weaver is a really interesting get. And this guy was a first round pick in the draft by the Cardinals, and the Cardinals generally know a thing or two about drafting, especially college guys early in the draft, and was such a impressive player early in his career that he was one of the headliners that they used to get Paul Goldschmidt from the Diamondbacks, which is why he was in Arizona in the first place. And his first year in Arizona in 2019, he made 12 starts, had a 2.94 ERA, a 3.07 FIP. He really looked like he was about to break out. Season ended early with a forearm strain. He really hasn't been the same pitcher since. And if you look at his numbers this year, he finally was moved to the bullpen. Superficially, doesn't look good at all. 7.71 ERA, but a 2.69 FIP. And the reason for that, he's thrown 16 and a third innings. If you break it down, he made one start this year for the Diamondbacks, and it was a disaster. He gave up 9 runs in 3 2/3 innings. Although 1 walk, 5 strikeouts, it was probably a lot of bad luck. You take that out by itself, and he suddenly looks much better. And just in July, pitching completely out of the bullpen, 8 games, 8 innings, 4 hits, 1 run, 2 walks, 8 strikeouts. The Royals intend to use him as a reliever for the rest of the season. Maybe they can consider putting him back in the rotation next year. But if nothing else, just leaving him in the bullpen. Luke Weaver has the ability, to be I think an 8th inning guy in the major leagues, like a very, very good reliever. The ranks of very good relievers come from failed starters. Luke Weaver, at this point, may be a failed starter, but he had history of success at in a major league rotation. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So I'm actually kind of optimistic that he could be a useful player. And frankly, if the Royals don't contend next season, I could see a situation where they get more for Luke Weaver trading him away at the trading deadline next July than it took to get him in the first place this July or this August.
You mentioned the platoon splits of one Emmanuel Rivera and what they were. 880. Let me get this right. 816. I'm sorry. OPS against left-handers 604. OPS against right-handers. He's right-handed, of course. 226, 271, 333. The batting average on base slug against righties against lefties, 283, 43, 473. So he clearly hits much better, as is almost always the case, and his are quite defined by 200 points. Doesn't this smell a little bit like we're going to be, looking at him playing just exclusively against left-handers in a platoon where the game is going? Certainly the San Francisco Giants rode that to a wave of success last year. They're kind of on the outside looking in right now, but that was something that, maybe they should have been a little bit more cognizant of. And if you knew that you were one injury away from Emmanuel Rivera being on your team, maybe plan for Emmanuel Rivera to be on your team and plan for a split. I'm going to tell you that, like, if you had those splits, why not a Lopez Rivera? And Lopez's splits, I looked them up real quick, are not as pronounced. 657 OPS against righties, 618 against lefties. But if you had that, if you weren't planning on Adalberto Mondesi at shortstop and you knew you had Rivera, or you go out and you get fine, it's not Nicky Lopez, you leave him over where he is, but find the other half of that platoon for Rivera, which has been something that's been very easy and very cost effective for teams like the Giants to do, that maybe Rivera and another guy could have been your answer at third base if you were at least open to. Like the Royals, their mindset seems to be about getting starting pitchers a 20-year career and getting position players a great everyday job. Like they don't want any part of platoons, any part of making moves, any part of turning over the rotation. They're waiting on this recreation of what happened in Atlanta. If I were to criticize that, it seems to be what's going on, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, no, what you're describing, that absolutely would have been a legitimate, option to do. And Rivera, it's a small sample size. Maybe those numbers aren't truly what he's capable of, lefty versus righty. But the thing that stands out to me is in a small sample size, 8 walks and 10 strikeouts against lefties in his career, 11 walks and 57 strikeouts against righties. So yes, I mean that to me is more of an indication that yes, he truly does hit much better against lefties. Yes, that I don't blame the Royals for making the decision that they did. I think this is a reasonable move, but in isolation, but it is a part of a greater team philosophy, which is not to be all that creative when it comes to how to use your personnel. I mean, going back, Ned Yost was legendary. Not forget platooning; he would never pinch hit. We were subject to Alcides Escobar, batting in key situations for his entire career. Maybe that paid off when we finally got to the postseason. But at the same time, you have a bench, and Ned Yost was deathly afraid to use it. The Royals, until recently, were very conventional, I think, with the types of pitchers that they use. And the one area in which they are starting to show that willingness to be unconventional, you point out, is with pitcher types. Castillo has the Rich Garces El Guapo body type, and I'm happy to see that as a reflection of they're not maybe as bound to this is what a pitcher must look like, right? Appearances are not as important, and obviously the Royals with Jose Cuas and with Wyatt Mills, are 2 pitchers who have unconventional motions. I got to see Mills up close yesterday at the game here in Chicago, and I mean, he's not Dan Quisenberry, but that is not 3/4. That is sidearm. That may be even a little bit below sidearm. And you could tell me he was hitting 89, 90, but the batters, especially the right-handed batters, were just like they did not know what to do with this guy. Yes, that should be what teams are looking for. It always drove me nuts that the Royals had one of the most unconventional yet extremely successful pitchers in Major League history in Dan Quisenberry, and they have been kind of afraid to go down that road with another pitcher like that ever since. So I want to see more of that. I would love to see them platoon more, and I hope that one day they will. But if they're not going to do that, then at least I think they did get a very interesting Major League talent in Weaver for a guy that they figured did not really have a future on the major league roster.
Right. And we'll see if he has the future as a platoon. John puts this up there. Why not Taylor? Makes no sense. We're going to get to the guys that didn't get traded here in a second, John, so be patient with us. We want to go through the deals that did happen first. Cam Gallagher is a Padre. This one's of note to me. I mean, I get it. Oh, you've got MJ Melendez and you've got Salvador Perez. This is why I want to highlight this one. I know that doesn't mean you give away quality catching because you have two other guys. Right? And what is the plan? This is the best defensive catcher you have. To me, the best pairing is either Salvi or MJ Melendez, unless Melendez can go play someplace else, with Cam Gallagher. He does not hitting at all, and he's still got a WAR. What is it? What does he? 1.5 is his WAR
1.2 career WAR. Yep.
1.2 career WAR because his defense is so good. And the Royals walked on Maldonado, and sent him on, and all he's done is basically be the starter for the Astros for the last 3 years while they go to postseasons. I'm wondering why a team that values athleticism and defense all over the place doesn't seem to value it as much behind the dish. They value catching. And Dave Morris said it from he got here. They take catcher after catcher after catcher in the draft. They always want to be strong in catching. And again, I'm not freaking out. Oh my God, you traded Cam Gallagher. I'm just trying to understand, could you have gotten a bigger piece and something more that you needed by moving Salvador Perez or moving MJ Melendez and been a better overall team, right? Now, maybe Drew Waters is going to step in and fill center field, and they found that spot someplace else. But and this comes to Michael A. Taylor, we're going to get to in a minute, because I'm going to tell you exactly the pitch we're going to hear in spring training next year. But could you have found that right fielder, right? Could you have moved Melendez for a right fielder? Is Melendez end up right? How does it all fit together? And why weren't you able to get more than what they ended up getting in this equation from all their catchers together?
Right. Well, when it comes to moving on Melendez, I mean, this is something I think we talked about in the very first Kauffman quarter before the season. But to me, a Melendez trade, that's the sort of trade you make in the offseason. You don't make that at the deadline with time of the essence, and because teams are looking for a very specific skill set to fill a specific hole in their team. The Melendez issue, there's so many issues that go into that. Can he catch? Do you believe he's a catcher? Do you believe he's a right fielder? So I understand not moving him at this point. The thing with Cam Gallagher, I would say the Royals absolutely value catcher defense as it's defined as catching and throwing. What maybe they don't value quite as much is pitch framing. Because that's when we talk about defense, where Cam Gallagher, I think, is excels compared to the other guys in the organization. Certainly Salvador Perez and MJ Melendez is pitch framing. Perez is obviously, a phenomenal throwing catcher,
right,
and a good plate blocker, but probably owing to his height, he's unable to get down and frame the low pitches, and he has, throughout his career, graded out as a poor pitch framer who's probably cost the Royals quite a few runs by leading to his pitchers getting more walks and fewer strikeouts. It doesn't mean he's not a good player, but it does affect his value.
And let me say this. If robot umps are coming, pitch framing's out.
Well, this is what I'm about to say. I don't think the Royals I would love to find out that the Royals made this move in part because they believe that's coming. I don't think that had a huge part to play here, but you know what? I do think they're coming. I don't think they're coming in 2023, and probably not in 2024. And frankly, Cam Gallagher's going to be a free agent after 2024, so it probably doesn't matter here. I think more for the tail end of Salvador Perez's career, it might actually extend his ability to catch at least part-time in the major leagues if they move to robot umps, because at some point, as his other defensive skills decline, I worry that the pitch framing thing is going to become such an issue that he no longer can be justified to playing behind the plate. And I'd like to see robot umps for a variety of reasons. I just think it's more fair, but I also think that will help the Royals in that regard. I think that they made this trade, though, in large part because, Cam Gallagher, he's a good defender. He's a step up above your typical backup catcher. His career line, because it's best to look at his career because his entire career is only 469 plate appearances. But for his career, a 240 hitter, 302 on base, 355 slugging. Not great, but for a backup catcher, a 300 on base percentage for his career, that's perfectly reasonable. And he probably is better than the average backup catcher in the major leagues. That's the reason why a team actually wanted to acquire the San Diego Padres in between trading for Juan Soto and Josh Bell and who else did they had one other huge guy. I can't even think of all the huge trades they made, but they somehow found time to trade
Josh
for Cam
Hader.
freaking Gallagher. Josh Hader. Well, we'll get to Josh Hader too. I have some thoughts there. The fact that they wanted Cam Gallagher, there is some value there, but the Royals have a lot of catchers in this organization. Sebastian Rivera is supposed to, is as a catch and throw guy, probably Cam Gallagher's equal. He's been in the major leagues. He can't hit even at Cam Gallagher's level, but the Royals think so highly of him defensively that they have brought him to the major leagues and let him play before his bat is ready. So Sebastian Rivera might be seen. They brought up Freddie Fermin during the Toronto series and let him make his major league debut. And then we've talked about Luca Tresh, who is a legitimate catching prospect that might be ready in a year or so. So I can see the Royals looking at their inventory of catchers and be like, we have so many catchers. We have a chance to turn Gallagher into a guy that we like, and we might as well talk about the guy they actually got, because that's obviously why they made the trade. Brent Rooker, who's an outfielder. He's a hitter, and that's by itself makes me excited. Former first-round pick, supplemental first-rounder from out of college 5 years ago. He's already 27. He's been in the majors. He has legit pop. His problem is he doesn't make enough contact. But in the minor leagues this year, 272 batting average, 385 on base, 605 slugging, 19 home runs in 61 games. Now, that's El Paso. I should point that out.
And he's 27.
Right. So this is not a guy like the ordinary development curve for a guy like this. He's going to be a fourth outfielder at best. The hope here is, again, that you put him in the Royals hitter development, and maybe you get lucky. You roll the dice that they can fix something, cut his strikeout rate. Because if you can cut this guy's strikeout rate by 25, 30%, you might have a real hitter. And he needs to hit, because he's not a good defender, even in left field. Like he's a DH probably at best. He could be a platoon bat. He's a right-hander. I think JJ Piccolo actually specifically made the point when talking about the trade that the Royals were getting a little bit left-handed. And so I think you talk about Emmanuel Rivera being like the platoon bat. I think the Royals look at this guy actually as a potential platoon option, as somebody maybe you platoon him at DH, maybe with Pasquantino, or maybe you platoon him in left field with a left-handed hitting outfielder. I don't know. I think right now he's just inventory, but Ken Gallagher was, again, just maybe not inventory, but he was not moving the needle for you as a contender. And those are the guys I'm never going to regret trading a guy of the caliber of a backup catcher.
Yeah, and in any, well, I'll have my reservations. I won't go as far as you will. I'll have reservations because I think he's a good pairing with an offensive catcher to have a nice combination behind the plate. So I'll stick up a little bit more for Cam Gallagher maybe. But I will say this: going and getting any bat with upside, with the way they've been with hitters of late, you feel pretty good. Okay, and I don't mind. You do have two other really good hitting catchers, so I'm not freaking out about Cam Gallagher. I want to be clear, but I do think there's value there. I think they need to get something from this kid, because if not for the Padres, somebody else would give value to a guy who can be a good catcher. The last deal, sending cash to Seattle, right? Mm-hmm. I will take any deal that is cash for a player. Okay, literally any deal. Buying a player. How much upside do we think is there with Anthony Misiewicz?
I think it's Misiewicz, but I could be wrong.
Trust me, I put 99%. You're further along than I am on this. Save it. Let's go with that.
I mean, like you said, it's all they give up is cash. To me, the biggest opportunity cost they give up here isn't the money; it's simply the 40-man roster spot. It's like those are valuable, and if Misiewicz is not going to be a major league caliber pitcher, then save it. But this is a guy who's already been in the major leagues, and 88 career innings. He's a strikeout to walk ratio of 3-1. I think the big thing with him is he is a lefty. They don't have a lot of healthy lefties in the system. Gabe Spire, has not been healthy. Jake Brent's had Tommy John surgery. Right now, I think it's Amir Garrett is really the only healthy left-handed reliever they have on the 40-man roster. And he has a pretty big platoon split in his career against left-handed hitters. have a 661 career OPS against him. Right-handers 842. So I see him as a lefty specialist potentially, but in that role, I think he could thrive. Beyond that, I don't have much more to say. But again, the price was right. It was money. If they don't like him, like the concern I would have isn't that they release him in a week and they give up cash. I don't care. The concern is they don't release him in a week, even though they realize he's not good, and they let him linger on a roster spot that he doesn't deserve. If he, to me, this is the Royals' chance to look at him up close, evaluate him. If they like what they see, great. If not, move on, and you haven't lost anything.
All right, let's talk about the people that weren't traded. Spencer just said this. Royals not trading Barlow was the biggest disappointment for me at the deadline. Relievers we're fetching some good returns. We had the question about Michael A. Taylor. Brad Keller was a guy, any number of names. Let's start, though, there with Barlow, because that was a popular one. There was said to be interest in Barlow. They don't get it done. Where should the frustration level be for Royals fans?
This is, to me, the number one issue I have with the trading deadline. I don't know if you noticed, with all the moves that the Royals made today, they added Luke Weaver to the Major League roster. Did you see what they did in order to open up space for him on the roster? They demoted Jose Cuas.
Yes.
And Jose Cuas is, a rookie, a great story, but also having a pretty decent season. I'm looking for his numbers here. He was walking too many guys, because apparently you cannot be a member of the Kansas City Royals organization without seeing your control go to pot. But in 23 innings, he had a 3.18 ERA, a 4.13 FIP, had allowed just one home run because he's an extreme ground ball pitcher. He has that unique motion and he gets ground balls. And they sent him to the minor leagues because they have too many relievers in their bullpen. Because at the same time that we were thinking they might trade away Barlow or perhaps even Josh Stillmont, they made every trade we just talked about. They added a reliever, except for the Cam Gallagher deal. They added a reliever in the Whit Merrifield deal. They got Max Castillo, who they sent to Omaha, even though he's probably ready to pitch in the major leagues. They got obviously the Misiewicz. They paid for him. He's in Omaha as well. And then they traded Emmanuel Rivera for Luke Weaver. So you're adding all of these relievers, and you didn't move anybody. So you're in a situation where your reliever is the deepest position in the organization right now, so deep that you were forced to send Jose Cuas down to the minor leagues. What a golden opportunity to trade some of that excess reliever depth, especially in a market where relievers were fetching high premiums. I mean, here's a list of the Royals Review kindly put together the list of relievers that were traded at the deadline. Just a partial list here, but Josh Hader, Taylor Rogers, Scott Efros, Lou Trevino, Jake Diekman, Jorge Lopez, David Robertson, Will Smith, Matt Bush, Zach Pop, Anthony Bass, Michael Fulmer, Trevor Rosenthal, Chris Stratton. The relievers were flying off the board, and several of these guys, and Zach Pop was like a Rule 5 pick 18 months ago. I believe the Marlins traded. They got a player who was a first-round pick just 3 years ago in Jordan Groshans, who's having a disappointing season, but was like a borderline top 100 prospect a year ago, for a guy that I don't think can hold Scott Barlow's jock, frankly. And they have club control. They have him for 5 years. Okay, well, you have Scott Barlow for 2.5 years. And what frustrates me is this is the same mistake the Royals have made since Dayton Moore was hired. Going back, I've mentioned Joakim Soria's name many times on this podcast because it's the same idea. You keep relievers at your peril, because no position in baseball has more turnover, has a faster jump to the top and a faster descent to the bottom than relievers. And what concerns me is the Royals will say, we couldn't possibly lose Scott Barlow because we want to contend, next season, and he's a huge part of what we want to accomplish. And there was nothing out there that the value would replace Scott Barlow. And I want to throw a hypothetical at you. Okay, imagine the Royals, instead of being in fighting to stay out of last place, were actually in first place. Okay, let's say they were 3 games up in the division. All right, and let's say they didn't have Scott Barlow. Let's say they had like Wade Davis, maybe not 2015 Wade Davis, but like 2016, 2017 Wade Davis. Okay, Could you imagine them trading Wade Davis, not in the Horace Soler deal after the season, but at the deadline, trading away a guy considered one of the most dominant relievers in the sport in first place in order to perpetuate their winning in the future? Trade him for maybe a slightly lesser reliever now, but get some really interesting talent for the future. Could you ever imagine the Royals doing something that?
No.
Well, the Milwaukee Brewers did that yesterday. All right, and you let the cat out of the bag inadvertently, not your fault, by mentioning Josh Hader's name. But the Milwaukee Brewers traded Josh Hader, who his ERA is like 4 this year because he had one outing where you have like 6 runs, but like he's still Josh freaking Hader. He has 59 strikeouts in 34 innings. Last year, 102 strikeouts in 59 innings and a 123 ERA. I mean, one of the defining relievers of the last 6-7 seasons in the major leagues, and is under contract for this season and next season. And the Milwaukee Brewers are in first place, and they traded him for 4 guys. One of the guys they got was Taylor Rogers, another reliever, basically the Padres closer that will replace him, and also having an ERA above 4. But Taylor Rogers has a FIP of 234 this season. So the Brewers are basically banking on the idea that Taylor Rogers will be just as good as Josh Hader for them in their bullpen this year. And in return, they also got 3 other players. Denisel Lamet, who was a very good prospect, who's had trouble staying healthy.
He's a big strikeout guy. Trust me, I've tried to push his career upwards with my fantasy team. He's got wicked stuff.
You're the reason he's played so poorly. Okay.
Yes.
And Robert Gasser was their second round pick last year, college pitcher, who's quite well regarded, 115 strikeouts in 90 innings and A-ball this year. And our old friend, yours and mine, Esteury Ruiz, who could be an everyday center fielder, for the Brewers, and had 60 stolen bases in 77 games and a 560 slugging average in the minor leagues this year. Like, they got a monster return.
Yeah, it should be pointed out, he's our old friend because he was part of the deal that went from the Royals. He was originally in the Royals.
Yes, that was traded to the Padres when the Royals actually traded probably too much talent to get some relief help the last time that they were actually in contention at the deadline.
And
so the Royals are willing to trade players.
Yeah, the quintessential lottery pick that we talk about all the time.
That 5 years later is paying off finally.
One of the top prospects in the Padres system when it's there. I'll go you a step further on that. Yes, no, the Royals would never do that, and that's kind of creativity. And it's why I thought you might see them. I go get, if you really think you're close, which, I mean, I think, can we agree that the moves, they thought they were contending this year, right? That's what they thought. Did the moves they made make you think that they feel like they're contending next year?
Yes. At least that they think. Well, the Luke Weaver trade, especially. I mean, that's a trade you make if you think that your window of contention isn't far away in the 2020. And look, with 12 teams making the playoffs instead of 10, very few teams cannot at least dream of contention the following season.
Okay, but with a payroll that is going to plummet next year, I thought this would be an opportunity. They had interest allegedly in Frankie Montas before the season. I think they signed Zach Greinke instead. Like, I would have, like, to your point about the Brewers, how about a team that, yes, is selling, but buys for the future, right? That would have been my dream trade deadline scenario, is that the Royals take a guy who's good now in the big leagues because it's their flag in the ground that we're coming next year. Here it is. And to your point, but I think these are all kind of peripheral moves. They're like throwing, again, I'll come back to throwing numbers at it. Speaking of throwing numbers, how many pitchers are on the Royals 40-man roster? Take a guess. Don't look. Take a guess.
Oh, God. Too many. I'm going to guess 24.
28.
Oh, my God. How is that even possible?
They have 28. They actually have 43 on the 40 because they have 3 guys on the 60.
Right, okay, but still, 50.
Honestly, one of them, and 2 of them are pitchers, right? Oh. And 2 of the 60 men are pitchers, so that's 26 that are healthy. Here is the list of their 40-man pitching staff. You ready? Scott Barlow, Jonathan Bolin, Jake Brents, Chris Bubich, Max Castillo, Taylor Clark, Dylan Coleman, Jose Cuas, Amir Garrett, Zach Greinke, Jonathan Heasley, Carlos Hernandez, Brad Keller, Jackson Kowar, Daniel Lynch, Wyatt Mills, Anthony Misiewicz. You know what? Make it 27. Anthony Misiewicz is listed here twice. Make it 27. they got me because I just counted through and didn't look at all the names. Joel Piamps, Brady Singer, Colin Snyder, Gabe Spire, Josh Stama, Luke Weaver, Nathan Webb, Ryan Weiss, Angel Zerpa, and Tyler Zuber. Come on.
I mean, there are a few of those guys are on the 60-day DL and or IL and don't.
Only two pitchers. The only 60 days are Tyler Zuber and Jake Brents. Yeah. The only 15-day is Angel Zerpa. Angel Zerpa.
Angel Zerpa. And who was that? You said Ryan Weiss? Is that what you?
Ryan Weiss. Would you like to hear about Ryan Weiss?
There's guys on the 40-man roster I don't even recognize. Like now I'm questioning my own judgment.
Now he's like every year he's on a couple of teams. So I got to look and see if he's actually been a Royal all this time. Reno. No, he came over somewhere. He was in the Rangers organization before this. Right now at Omaha, he's 0-1 with a 7.80 ERA, 15 innings, 18 hits, 13 runs. He's walked 6 and struck out 13.
Oh, well, no wonder he's on the 40-man roster then. Never mind me questioning.
He is 25 years old, though, so at least he's got time on his side.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, what more to your point, there's only 15 hitters on the 40-man roster, which, think about it. You have to have they're a 26-man roster. They're trying to make a rule that limits teams to having 13 pitchers, and eventually it'll be down to 12, which means you have to have at least 13 or 14 hitters in the major leagues. And the Royals unfortunately are not even that much of an outlier. Way too many teams are spending so much energy trying to put pitchers on their 40-man roster because they're deathly afraid of getting through a full season and finding 1,450 innings that hitters are getting short shrift and teams are running out of hitters to bring. This is why nobody pinch hits anymore, is because you don't have anybody on the bench who can actually hit. But that's too much. That's just crazy.
Okay. So now let's talk another one. Michael A. Taylor didn't go. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you what you're going to hear. You are going to hear in spring training about Drew Waters playing left and Michael A. Taylor in center, and Isbel Olivares and right, some combination, or they'll probably sign some veteran to throw into that mix as well.
Good defender.
And you're going to hear about how they have 3 center fielders. Exactly. They're going to find some other guy who used to play center field, some Reggie Sanders type, and they're going to talk about how they have 3 center fielders. Remember how they oohed and awed, and part of the reason they thought they were contending was because they had 3 shortstops on the infield? Mm-hmm. I mean, they rank towards the top in defense. They just don't seem to get that you don't catch your way to world championships.
If you said that right now to anybody member of the Royals front office, they'd probably lean back and put their arms up and make sure that the light hit their 2015 World Championship ring just so and sparkled in your face, because they will argue that that's exactly how they won in 2014 and 2015 with Lorenzo Cain, Alex Gordon, and Jarrod Dyson. Obviously, it's a simplistic way to look at it. Well, here's the thing. If you have an outfield defense as good as the 2014-2015 Royals, where literally 3 of the 5 or 6 best defenders in the American League were all on the Royals, and also Alex Rios, but they would get him out of the game after 6 innings and bring in Jarrod Dyson. Yes, it can work, but you have to have an elite defense. One of the things you mentioned, we have not discussed this. This is sort of the dirty little secret about the Royals this year. Is you mentioned, we went into the season thinking 3 shortstops. We got Nicky Lopez, Bobby Witt, and Adalberto Mondesi, all quality shortstops. We're gonna have a great infield defense. The infield defense hasn't been that great. And frankly, even it really has nothing or very little to do with Adalberto Mondesi's injury, except in so much as it moved Witt from third base to shortstop.
Yeah.
Because Bobby Witt's defensive metrics at shortstop are terrible. Now, it's only 62 starts there. Defensive metrics take a while to settle in. Maybe that's not a reflection of what he actually is at shortstop. But he is, as the last I checked, I think out of like the 15 defenders in the 15 shortstops in the American League with the most playing time, he ranked 14th in terms of defense.
Yeah.
He's made a lot of errors. I love the idea of having him at third base as a brilliant defensive third baseman. Now I'm wondering if they need to move him back to third base to just make him an above average defensive third baseman.
Or let's talk about the outfield. At some point, somebody has to be good in the outfield. Listen, I had that thrown in my face by Sam McDowell, the Kansas City Star. And when I was talking to, somehow we got on to Mondesi, and I will continue to say, I don't understand why you're building a team around Mondesi. But the point was made to me like, well, but look at Bobby Witt's defense. That's why you needed Mondesi there. And I really felt like this is coming straight from the Kansas City Royals. And which I will caution you that if you're now throwing Bobby Witt Jr. under the bus to protect your decisions about Adalberto Mondesi, you've lost your freaking mind as an organization. You have lost your mind if you're putting things out there negatively about other players to protect Adalberto Mondesi. Okay? Let me just state that first and foremost.
100%. Look, you and I can criticize Bobby Witt's defense. We're not the world's runners. If they're criticizing it to protect Adalberto Mondesi, yes, that's
right. And so I don't know, but like I'm kind of hearing that like, okay, well listen, you're in the get it right business. I don't know if Bobby Witt can catch your field. I don't watch him play every minor league. Maybe there are guys out there that do. I know the MLB package, and you can do it. I don't have time. I got the other sports to do as well. All I know is what I'm told. They routinely, everybody is great defensively. MJ Melendez was great. He can catch right now. Bubba Starling, Gold Glove center fielder right now when he was down in the minors. Everybody in the Royals minor league system is the greatest defender ever. That's always what we hear. And now here's another one, Bobby Witt Jr. Now, I will give them credit. I was told that Mondesi has more range, and Mondesi's the better center fielder if he's healthy. Okay? Well, that's been proven. That was legit info. But if Bobby Witt Jr. is going to rank at the bottom of all the shortstops, why is he still playing shortstop? Why don't you figure that out in the minor leagues and put him out in the outfield? Or, you had him at third base. Play Nicky Lopez at short and leave him at third base if he's overexposed. And I know you said put him at short. I did, because I was told he was a tremendous defensive shortstop with all kinds of hitting skills. But had I been given the real information, or at least the way it appears now, that MJ Melendez is not good behind the plate and that Bobby Witt Jr. would be the worst shortstop in the American League, then I would give you a different freaking plan.
Right. Well, the sort of unifying theory of everything we just talked about here, and bring it back to Michael Taylor and the trades and everything, is the Royals fall in love with their players, and sometimes that means that they don't evaluate them rationally. Whether that means acknowledging, you know what, this guy's a great player. He could become a Hall of Famer as a third baseman, but he cannot play shortstop at the level that we need to be a championship club. Or whether it means this guy is a really valuable reliever, but he's not going to be a really valuable reliever in 2 or 3 years when we're ready to contend, and we're better off trading him now. All of these decisions the Royals are making that are frustrating you and I center around that inability to acknowledge that their players, however much they love them, however much they, believe in them, still are not perfect and have flaws, and they need to put those players in the best position for them to succeed and in the best position for the organization to succeed in the long term, even if that means trading a guy before he's lost it, like Whit Merrifield. I think it's all the same thing. The Royals love their players so much that they don't always think rationally about how best to use them, whether it means the position they play or the organization that they are going to be a part of in the future.
Yeah. I mean, at some point they've got to be the most important thing. I've said it a million times. The most important thing in sports is when you look in the mirror to accurately view what's looking back at you, right? The suck in your gut and wear a black shirt, you're still a fat ass. You got to see fat ass so you get to the gym and get to work. I know. I just don't get to the gym, right? I know what I see looking back at me. You've got to be honest with yourself about what's looking back at you. And if you're not,
Soren, I don't know what you're seeing, but I think I have a beautiful mane of hair. So
it's perfect. All right. So in the end, you give a pass to the trade deadline? Is that what we say?
I mean, I give the Royals a C. If they had traded Barlow or Taylor, I would have given them a B. If they traded both of them, I probably would have given them an A. It's just a matter of who they traded. They did the bare minimum to pass, but they, I think, missed out on an opportunity to really add even more talent for guys that are just probably not going to be an important part of the Royals' next playoff team.
I'm with you.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I'm with you on the C. I will say this, with it to be determined. Because, like I said, that 40-man is a hot mess with 27 pitchers on it. And I gotta believe that this offseason there are some major trades, right? This is the prelude to what's coming in the offseason to try to make this ball club fit.
I hope so, but you know what? I mean, we also say, I think this offseason is the time they're going to make some major personnel moves with the coaches. I mean, at some point, hope ceases to be a strategy, and I need to see actual. I need to see actual moves, and not just me. I need to see John Sherman. I need to see John Sherman need to see actual moves. I need to see some urgency on the part of ownership that they actually need to see results from the team. I do want to finish. I want to finish with one final positive thing, because it just occurred to me, was one of the things that it's not an official transaction yet, but along with the Royals sending out a new lineup after the Whit Merrifield trade was announced today, the Omaha Storm Chasers put out an amended lineup before the game today, and the amendment was that a certain Michael Massey was not in their lineup, which got a lot of us excited because he almost certainly will be coming back to the Royals, and hopefully they didn't bring him up to just sit on the bench. Hopefully he'll be playing every day. And it really struck me that for all the issues, for all of the frustration we've had with the pitchers and just the disappointment of the season as a whole, let me just take you through the calendar very quickly. Bobby Witt Jr. made his major league debut in April. MJ Melendez made his major league debut, I think, in May. If not May, close to it. Let's count it. If it was April 30th, bear with me. Count it as May. Vinny Pasquantino made his major league debut in June. Nick Pratto made his major league debut in July. And now Michael Massey, not making his major league debut because he was up in the Toronto series, but essentially getting his chance to start every day in the major leagues in August. That is one everyday hitter debuting in your lineup every month of the season so far. That's 5 guys. And I'm not saying all 5 of those guys are going to be stars, or even that they're all going to be still playing in the major leagues regularly in 2 or 3 years. But frankly, right now, they all should probably be in the everyday lineup in 2023. 5 guys who should be playing every day next year.
And let's go a step further. That come September, they'll probably be the next one in Drew Waters.
Drew Waters. That's You're stealing my thunder. You're stealing my thunder, Soren. Yes, and in September, I mean, I was thinking about could they do it again? And yes, they absolutely could. I could think through. That is quietly pretty rare. Even the 2011 Royals, the gold standard for youth movements in forget Royals, Kansas City sports probably. You had Hosmer, you had Moustakas, you had Salvador Perez, and I guess you have to throw him in Johnny Giaffatella. That one didn't pan out, but Giaffatella I was excited. I remember watching the Royals that year here in Chicago in September. Some of the most fun I ever had at a ballpark. The Royals destroyed the White Sox, and all 4 of those guys, and Alcides Escobar, who obviously was not didn't debut as a Royal, but had been acquired, all played well. And it was like seeing the future of your lineup come together that quickly was a really heady experience. But even that team, it was 4 guys who debuted that year. The Royals are already at 5. And potentially 6 with Drew Waters. Now, on the pitching side, the Royals also had Danny Duffy that year. The Royals really haven't had any pitchers of note, I think, that you would say debut. Certainly no starters debuting this year. But I'd rather have hitters than pitchers because they're more reliable. And, if we've talked enough about the shortcomings on the pitching side. So I just want to acknowledge, when the Royals farm system gets ranked this winter, it's probably not going to be pretty. I'm not sure they have a top 100 prospect in the organization right now. But that's because they brought them all to the majors. So right. I think we don't want to hit them too hard for that. they have a
It's also
It'll be really fun watching these guys the next couple.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's an important part to make when everybody gets down. The pitching is frustrating, but you have to acknowledge the progress that's being made on the hitting side. It's also a reason why that 40-man roster is so upside down. Why it's so 27 pitchers is because the hitters are here, right? And so they're saying, okay, we don't have anybody else we need to put into that slot, so we're going to go ahead and fill it with arms and throw numbers at it and get a look at everything we can. You're probably going to see guys going up and down the rest of the year trying to get a look at everything they can to figure out who is in the mix for next year. But I do believe that the trade, I won't even call it that hurts, the trade that makes it fit needs to come this offseason if you really think you're close to contending. It's something that needs to happen. Rany, great stuff as always, buddy. I know you got a vacation around the corner. Enjoy. I will get back to my vacation now as we talk a little Royals baseball. Always love doing it. Trade deadline, special edition here of the Kaufman Corner. So for Dr. Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro. Thank you for joining us here on Kaufman.